Good morning, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Maui, the occupied islands here in the middle of the Pacific, known as Hawaii. Welcome into my heart. I hope you're having a beautiful day, wherever you may be. Thank you for being in my life. Today's sharing, mystical symmetry, a new term for me. I'm going to explore it a little bit here today, and a reflection on life and death, and in parentheses, the process we're all in, which is on one level dying, and I want to explore a reversal of that concept into not just living, but shape-shifting, rebirthing, taking the death out of consciousness. Where to begin? Yesterday, actually all week, and yesterday and today especially, reflecting a lot on my own mortality, my own existence, primarily post-diagnoses. In April, when I was in Los Angeles with this extreme condition known as an acutely enlarged ascending aortic aneurysm, which from the doctors, surgeons that I've been speaking to, is a fatal illness unless one undergoes immediately, according to them, a very dangerous, highly complicated open heart surgery. Okay. So I've been reflecting on my life post-diagnoses and trying to, as my own Dhamma artistic experience, what are my insights? What are my, I want to use the word lessons, but that's a little bit too strong. This must be a way to describe a process of acclimatizing, naturalizing, growing more familiar with the fatigue and the struggle, the existential angst, the holiness, the reverence, the terror of existence with something. In my case, perhaps you too, I know I'm not alone in the world, who are dealing with really complicated mental, physical, psychological, physical conditions. And so I'm trying to find what are the lessons, what are the learning, what are the insights in this process? Because there's such a preoccupation in society to keep living, continuity, perception at all cost, longevity. I'm not saying longevity over quality, but this deeply embedded, I want to use the word propaganda, if you will. It's a very strong word, to anoint existence as we see it and know it in form, to be not the end all, but to be the priority of the dimensionality that we're embedded. This brings up obviously the issue of reverence and grace, of the essence of religion, high spirituality, Dhamma, Dharma, the numismatic, the mystical symmetry of the context that we're all breathing and walking and sleeping and fighting and loving within. And symmetry, is there a lawfulness within this paradigm of totality? And of course, the breach of normalcy is often seen as catastrophic illness and death. And I don't know about you, maybe you are in a similar position as I. Maybe you have a fatal illness. Maybe you have a terminal condition. Maybe you are hyper aware of your own intrinsic mortality. I don't bring this up to induce or to encourage any type of fear at all. Quite the opposite. It's to not even just examine, but to courageously, I use the word for me, courageously as best as possible, enter the vulnerability of that innate, so sanctified concept called death and mortality, and how we imbue in those words, those ideas, unthinkable belief structures that either anesthetize us from more intimate feelings or catapult us into phantasmagorical projections of wonderment and hope, whether it be heaven or the avoidance of hell. There's so much embedded in the concept and the concepts of mortality and death. And you use the word dying, and it intrinsically brings a kind of cultural, political sadness inherent in the use of the word, as if there is something permanently wrong about dying. Okay, that's the edge that I've been hanging on since, I don't know when I entered the monastery in Burma back in 77, 78, 79. When I got involved in Buddhism, when death and dying were supremely brought to the forefront of awareness and allowed to be placed on the altar of reflection, and to take the propaganda out of the concepts as much as possible through the direct experience of one's own vipassana, one's own mindful engagement of consciousness, and to study the lawfulness, the symmetry of the mystical, the dharmic. You could play in those concepts and to see how real they were, not just to you, but how real they were in your understanding, in your education on this planet. Okay, it's kind of a preface here. And so I've been taking note, especially yesterday, spent a lot of time yesterday trying to lay down some initial thoughts about the process post-diagnoses of this aortic aneurysm, and now the aortic valve from the heart, which is now beginning to dissect. And so there's this very discernible medical overlay that's been planted. I don't say that it's been planted in me, I've taken it on, of what they call imminent fatality, death, if there isn't immediate surgery, which I've decided not to do. And so life and death and dying are ever present, maybe for you as well. Okay. And I am personally attempting as much as humanly possible to take the fear, the terror, the propaganda, the misinformation, whether it be inherited through my DNA, education, parents, ghosts, teachings, teachers, books, I don't know exactly where, and to elevate a higher radiant truth. And so I've been outlining the lessons that I'm learning. And quite honestly, in summation of what I learned up to this point and what I'm learning, is that, I dare say this, the idea that I've been brought up to believe on the heavenly messenger of death, that somehow it is the most precious of concepts to reflect upon, to motivate present time, present awareness. To keep death always over your left and your right shoulder and mainlining through your veins and your blood system, somehow as motivation. Now that it's so surreally implanted in my own heart, literally, that you will die any second, stating the obvious for every one of us alive, but ever more so now that you've got this aortic aneurysm. And even having a surgeon recently tell me out here in Hawaii that don't even bother to call 911 because there's no one on this island that can save your life if it dissects or ruptures. So it's a very discernible religion that I'm trying to decode, if you will. And what is my own deeper felt truth. And that radical priority that I feel that I've had for decades of challenging fear, whether it be imposed from the inside or externally, or both, and certainly challenging deluded conditionings that lead me down narrow paths of conformity to politically correct or spiritually correct or religiously correct, culturally sanctioned belief systems. I want to know what I want to know. I want to know what I do know. I want to know the secret things of my own beingness, so to speak. I don't want to belong to the church of tradition or orthodoxy. There's enough said about that. I want to break the coding of my own DNA, my own cognitive proclivities to congeal, if you will, in the traditions, in the orthodoxies, in the dogmas. I don't want to live an animated, paralyzed life, an animated life through voice and a paralyzed life through the soul, through attachment to concepts, attachment to rites and rituals, attachment to self-identity, attachment to time, attachment to form. I want to live in the nuministic. I want to believe in the felt reality of the mystical symmetry of my own personal goddess, my own God, my own Buddha, my own Dhamma. My awakening is my desire system, not to try to emulate the awakening of the Buddha. Personalizing the mystical. And my point is that the overall insight that's emerging for me is that now that I have death truly as a reflection morning, day, and night, as much as I have the courage to embody the sensitivity of the moment as always cut with the potential of discontinuity or death. It's not as if I feel more alive now than ever, but I do feel far better than ever. Now, I don't know exactly how to understand that. And it comes to this first insight is this the best day of your life? Are you really, really willing, Alan, to wake up in the morning and make this day the very best day of your life and to push everything else aside? Drop everything from the stage of artificiality and embody the radical nakedness of the birthing process, not that you're dying. That's a very key insight for me. And I attribute this to a conversation I had with my late teacher, the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, before he passed away in 2016. Many of you know that we had a book of conversations that he titled Wisdom for the World, Mindful Advice for the People of My Country. I recommend that you read his words. A concept that was introduced in that book, or at least I felt it in a way that really touched something new in me, which was taking the death out of consciousness. You know the word nibbana in the Pali Buddhist language, and the Buddha often attributed this concept of unconditional release from greed, anger, and delusion to be the deathless. There was no longer a deluded identity attachment to individual separate existence. That the symmetry was without center, without boundary, without epidermis. These were just conventional labels attributed to conventional experience. But really the process of the Dhamma, the mystical symmetry of being, is not about dying, it's about birthing. And I just find that shift so radical for me personally. I don't know about you, but it's so radical. I'm going to write about this in an upcoming film and a new book that I'm working on right now. 10 life lessons in facing death and not giving a shit. I mean, really, that's the subtitle. Nor is it a self-help book. But to really, really dive into this embrace of soma, or the sonic shaping of the nuances of cognitive reality that are unique, utterly unique. Pause here. Unique to you and unique to me. We hear the word anatta, or emptiness of self-fixation or self-identity, and we think of, I easily think of sameness, but at the same time, utter uniqueness, and that there's this rebirthing, this shaping, which, okay, what's the central entelechy of symmetry and mystical symmetry is expression. Birthing is the art of expression. And so I'm thinking, like, how to really challenge the language, if you will, of ordinary belief systems, death and old age and dying. But really here in the conversation I'm having with my late teacher, the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, and the Buddha himself, and all of the Sangha, all of the collective intelligences of the Dhamma that has ever been in this universe, do you feel it? Is this the best day of your Dhamma life? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm not dying at all. I'm rebirthing. Sure, you could couple it with saying that the form will perish. Obviously, it does, seemingly. Or are they like sand granules that really just become more and more powder-like in the cosmos, or just like neutrinos, the smallest particle that's discernible within totality? What is the spirit molecules that make up form? Or do they die too? No. Rebirthing. We're a consortium of cognitive properties unique to each of us, and yet with tremendous symmetry in a hyper-interrelatedness known as Dhamma. And that juxtaposition of mystical uniqueness and mystical symmetry is an incredible duality, a dance of either fear and terror or unity, harmony, and rebirthing. And this is where I am playing right now in my own life. Maybe I hope you can relate. Well, I'm inviting you to relate of how to take death out of our existence. And now that I come right back to, I've been diagnosed with this so-called fatal illness with this ticking bomb analogy, with a short fuse no less, and reinforced wherever I go. I'm seeing a hospice nurse on Wednesday. I mean, it's happening. And it's happening for you. It's happening for all of us. But the more I inquire, I don't find its reality. Sure, if I want to identify with form, my body, my hands, movement, as what life is, then it'll cease. How many times I've been as a monk or a war correspondent during my brief periods in war zones, or an independent observer in the areas of Shan State and Karen State in Burma, and being up close to the carnage of war, seeing execution, seeing assassination, seeing bullet wounds, seeing decapitated heads placed on stakes by the Burmese military in the Karen State. How many autopsies have you seen? How many autopsies have I witnessed as a monk? Watching them just surgically peel back the skin of a face to reveal the muscles, and then all of a sudden the attachment to form and beauty, it's just like skin deep. You go, wow. And how many times have I sat in Calcutta? And how many times have you been to the burning ghats in Benares or Varanasi, and you sit in timeless wonderment, right? And watch the skin peel back from the bodies of life. And you reflect, this too is my own condition. But do we place our life and consciousness in form? Cognitive creatures, the psychedelic and meditation has told us of continuity, of becoming. Consciousness as a force of conditions in symmetry that are unique to one's own karma, one's own configuration, in a galactic or a hypersymmetry of other forms, whirlpools in an ocean of infinity. And here we are as individuals dealing with conventional belief systems of birth, of aging, of work, of illness and death. But is it really true? And that's what led me to Buddhism and to Dharma and to meditation, is that death is a lie. It's a conventional artifice placed upon transformation. But what is in transformation? Rebirthing. You look at the classical Buddhist texts, and I've been looking at them lately, and you see the Buddha who made an aspiration, so to speak, with Sumedha Buddha way, way back, so far back it's incalculable, where he was inspired to want to become a Buddha himself. And Sumedha, it said, looked upon this young man and said, indeed, your aspiration to become a full Buddha will be realized in infinite lifetimes into the future, well, nearly infinite. And from that point on, he became known as a bodhisattva, a being committed to the actualization of Buddhahood, a rebirthing process throughout time immemorial, not death, but an energetic form of mystical symmetry of consciousness embodied in multiple body forms: animals, rabbits, pheasants, birds, fish, humans, devas, brahmas. The rebirthing of the energetic of the paramis, it said, the configurations or the qualities of consciousness that when developed to the heightened degree of excellence, they become in fruition to be known as a Buddha. A rebirthing, not a deathing, not a redeathing. That's a conventional label. And I'm going like, take the fear out of the process. Life is about expression, self-expression. It's about the symmetry of the courage to keep on pushing away the conventional and to rise up in the development of your most beautiful states of mind based upon the forms, and I'll close here with what you want to actualize. The Bodhisattva had the vision of self-expression to become a Buddha. His wife Yasodhara, from time immemorial, had the aspiration, it said, to become a chief disciple of a Buddha and to be married to a Buddha in the process. Sariputta, the chief in wisdom other than the Buddha, it said in the traditional Tipitaka, had the aspiration to rebirth through time immemorial, to become chief disciple, chief male disciple of a Buddha. The shaping of parami, the shaping of cognitive qualities, of symmetry into the chief embodiment of wisdom. There was no death in the process. It's a pure act of ongoing mystical symmetry driven by chaitana, intentionality, chanda, the conscious desire for formations of freedom. The beautiful states of mind being created through parami development. It's like, oh my God, it's not about immortality, it's about being unconfined by the misinformation of conventional teachers and religions that don't have roots in Dhamma. And I'm feeling, as I walked on the beach yesterday, and I'm dropping down onto the sand and squeezing all these sand granules, and I'm seeing the beach of granules. And then I'm looking out in the ocean and thinking all of these molecules, and I could hear the Buddha talking to me through my own being. You've cried more tears, Alan Clements, than all the waters in all the four great oceans. Have you not cried enough from the loss of lover and mother and brother and sister and father and friend to not turn away from the misinformation and the propaganda of the conventional? You're not dying. And I grabbed the sand and threw it away, and I realized, wow, I am living in a rebirthing process. I'm not dying at all. And I'm going like, wow, what an overrated concept. Death isn't the issue. When you look at it, it's the people who do not understand rebirthing that fear death. Rebirthing isn't so much the fear of, oh, I'm going to be reborn as a centipede or a bird. It's the trust in the self-expression of our conviction in the Dhamma, the symmetry of our Dhamma, the artistry of our Dhamma. I want to know the secret things. And I'm walking down the beach and I'm going like, for 3 years now, you've been making an aditant. A determination to what? Seda Upandita informs you on how to make this aditant, of how to rebirth and how to navigate the paramis of your own being, your own configuration of Dhamma, your own shaping throughout time immemorial. You too, Alan Clements, have an aspiration. I'm going, is this the best day of your life? It is, if you remember, Alan, your aspiration, your fulfillment. You've done well. You became fulfilled through your desire to become a monk. You feel fulfilled through your aspirations to have meditated with a great Kalyanamitta, and you've been blessed with 2 or 3 of these Kalyanamitas. You've been blessed by your aspiration to be in company with great freedom fighters from the heart, Da Aung San Suu Kyi, U Win Tin, U Chi Mung, Tin, and so many other hundreds that you've met. You've been blessed by some of the most mystical, powerful, beautiful women on the planet as lovers, as friends. You've been blessed by a beautiful father, a brother, a mother, uncles and aunts and cousins. You've been blessed. And you are even more blessed. I'm walking down the beach, crying in the rain, walking through a rainbow. It's as if the world had shown me the destiny of my vocation, which is to shape shift my paramis to become, in my next life, in the Sangha of Maitreya, the next Buddha to be. That is my aspiration. And there I want to be in the company of my samsaric Sangha. I am rebirthing into that symphonic expression of vision, mystical symmetry. But you should be, oh my God, you're going to be fearing death. It's because of the attachment to the people and the things and the events. Breathing, it's okay, but I'd much prefer to breathe without the need for oxygen. I'd like to just simply breathe the transparent freedom of Nibbana. I want to be in the company of the finest shapeshifters that the cosmos would ever know. And it comes to me from my belief systems, in my experience, to be in the company of a Buddha, to be in the company of a Sangha, in a sasana dance. And I want to take birth with Maitreya and my samsaric Sangha in their next human incarnation. And there, I want to shape, shift, and rebirth consciousness into Nibbana, to become an arhat, to become fully endowed with the abhinya, the psychic powers. I want to dance in the radiance of mystical play. I want to overcome all fear of death and dying and hardship, all the misinformation and propaganda. Let me close here. I'm going like, wow, man, you don't have to believe the tyranny and the propaganda and the pornography of politics. You know that very well. You don't have to believe misinformation. You're not susceptible to indoctrination and mind control. Any more to the refined levels of religion and philosophy. What's your religion? And I'm walking on the beach under the rainbow and I'm going like, yes, rebirth into the finest states of consciousness you've ever known. And when you look at the symmetry of the Buddha's chief disciples, men and women, you've got 180 men and women that made adhitthans. This is so rad. From time immemorial to embody specific characteristics and traits and proclivities and refinements of symmetry, to then anoint in their final life as significant members of the sasana with a Buddha in their own samsaric Sangha. And if you look at the Jataka tales, just playing along here in the traditional motif, the Buddha is talking to so many of the men and women in the sasana during the time of his teachings and how they were connected in previous lifetimes. There's something so cool about that we're not dying, we're rebirthing into a more composite intimacy known as Sangha. Heightened symmetry within consciousness and form, if it's human or deva, where we play in theatrical, mystical, musical, spoken word dance parties called Dhamma. And I'm going like, fear's not such a big deal. I want to I got rebirthing in my blood. And so I'm encouraging myself to drop the idea of dying and fear and mortality and discontinuity and embed as deeply as possible in the sonic symphony of mystical symmetry and abide in the qualities of consciousness that I cherish the most and identify with their formation, shifting, rebirthing as who I am, figuratively speaking, in the anatification of consciousness, the emptiness of self, but at the same time, the unique configuration of my own aditant, my own aspiration. Do you hear me? I'm just playing out loud here in the poetry of my Dhamma. And I'm going, have you taken fear out of living? I can't quite find it at the moment. I fear more of being hit by another motorist when I'm driving to the beach, to go onto the beach and walk in my Dhamma poetry, and to play in the ocean and scream and cry in the rain and get wet and feel fearless for this time, and to come back and to meditate and to do yoga. But I can tell you, it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life to be diagnosed with a fatal illness. Somehow it's excited non-death, non-dying. And this beautiful sonic hymn called Rebirthing, thanks to the Buddha and my teachers, the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, Sayadaw U Sujata, and the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, and all the women and men who keep alive this incredible rebirthing consciousness with the aspiration in it. And I will close here. Even when you look carefully, like say at the lifetime of the Buddha, and one of the discourses, I'm not sure which one it was, but many of you know who've studied Buddhism will know that Devadatta, his cousin and his obsessive, compulsive desire to denigrate the Buddha and to split the Sangha. Devadatta, it's said in the text, which is quite amazing, was the incarnation of evil throughout time immemorial, and Buddha's nemesis, lifetime after lifetime. Not a very favorable aditant or an aspiration. But when Devadatta, after numerous attempts to harm, to undermine, and to literally murder his family member, the Buddha, unsuccessfully, of course, he passed away, I'm not sure how. And the nuns and monks and people, as I understand the discourse, not only felt relieved at Devadatta's demise, but began to celebrate. And who wouldn't celebrate the disappearance of a nemesis, a Ming Online, a Pol Pot, a Hitler, a serial killer, an asshole? And the Buddha is said to have said in these texts, which is so rad, not to celebrate, my friends. I could not have evolved the paramita of metta, the musicality of my own mysticism of love, my ability to be unconditionally refined with metta, regardless, even of my most ardent enemy, Devadatta. Without him in my life through time immemorial, I would not have evolved the paramita of loving kindness to the level that I have. What I hear in that is mystical symmetry. That the gift that we all play in each other's lives, regardless. And then he said, according to the text, that Devadatta would in fact at some point in the future become a Buddha himself, a Pacceka Buddha. It's so, to me, that is so rad. It so points to the symmetry and the rightness of the context called samsara. If in fact, I don't know, if in fact you've got an alignment to your rebirthing process and develop a Dhamma finesse with the constituents of what defines rebirthing, the paramis, dana, sila, samadhi, panya, identifying where we identify. Don't place your identity, Alan, in form, it will only die. Place your identity in the shape-shifting, the rebirthing of the composite qualities of consciousness. These chaitasikas embody the transformational attributes of the Dhamma to the aspiration of nibbana, arhantship, abhinya. Therein lies where you can live fearlessly without the fear of death and dying. And I've never felt so liberated and, quite frankly, happy when I'm in this consciousness. Yes, I have my struggles and fears like we all do. Where will I go? How will I afford it? How can I fly? Will I get Delta? Will I ever be in love again? All the various ways in which my conventional puzzle board configures to keep me human. But then throughout it, now and again, when I meditate and feel and play in the luminosity of Dhamma and rebirthing, and not to place my identity in form that perishes and dies and becomes diseased, but in the liberty to shape consciousness into the creation of my aditant, my aspiration. See every event, every person as that opportunity to heighten the consciousness of not just the concept of rebirthing, but what do you want to do? Like I love the spoken word, I love theater, crafting scripts. What will you say? Who do you want to be? What is your creation? I think this is where a lot of us get lost, is that we lose our relationship to creation and the dexterity of the mystical to create formations based upon vision. We can dream, we can adventure, we can co-create, co-craft, just like the word tantra with a lover. We can craft and create existential trans-orgasmic experience of liberty, of beauty, of tenderness. And do you want to live in that level of the holy, the nuministic? Isn't that the role of walking in the footsteps of your Allah, your Jesus, your Christ, your Buddha, your Sariputta, your Yasodhara, your own expression of the holy? So, thank you for this little moment of reflection on life and death and dying and the power of living within the sonic expression of the aditant. What is your aspiration? And making Dhamma and self-expression the creation of your rebirthing. Who do you want to be in this life? What do you want to bring forth from the depths of your being? What do you want to see for your future life and your next life? It's an infinite tapestry, to state the obvious, but it's so easy to overlook and to be weighed down by the propaganda of the ordinary. Why it's there, I'm not sure, but to challenge those places in the mind that configure with misinformation and denigration and shame and worry, and dive into the symmetry of your highest spiritual, reverential vision for yourself in this life and in the next. And I'd like to close today. I have a short section from a book I brought together, I wrote back in 2011 for my daughter, Sarabella. There were 108 reflections, if you will, on the art and activism of freedom. I've been reading this from now and again, and I feel that they're never more important today than ever. This one is called, it's only short, 2 pages, called In Our Minds. And it starts with a quote by Bernard Bars. The scientific exploration of human consciousness is just an extension of the arts, theater, literature, and even religion. We are returning to a project that has moved human beings for centuries to apply the mind to its own understanding. Then I write, the awakening of consciousness is saying that from the very depth of our being, there is a natural creative intelligence that holds the answers to existence. The more deeply I search for the roots of our global environmental crisis, states Al Gore, the more I am convinced that it is an outer manifestation of an inner crisis that is, for lack of a better word, spiritual. Then I write, I firmly believe that by taming the afflictive forces within consciousness, we have the best chances of survival while ending our degradation of the planet. Václav Havel, the former president of the Czech Republic, stated in an address to the United States Congress that, quote, without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better. And the catastrophe toward which this world is headed, ecological, social, and demographic, will be unavoidable. I continue. I think we are aware at this point that we must all wake up, individually and collectively, to how our inner world impacts the outer world. Consciousness is our bond with all life. It is our common heritage. It is our wilderness, our paradise, our prison, our bliss. We inhabit the known as if on an island, while the great unknown remains like a mountain submerged infinitely deep within the ocean of the unconsciousness. When and why things emerge from its inner depths remains largely a mystery. What we do know is that the mind can be what we make it. It can be friend or foe. It can give life or take it. It can serve or enslave. It can give hope or destroy it. It can dream or denigrate. It can create beauty or concoct evil. It's all right there behind our eyes, in and around us too. And its exploration and development has never been more important. As the 14th Dalai Lama so famously said, perhaps now that the Western sciences have reached down into the atom and out into the cosmos, finally to realize the extreme vulnerability of all life and its value, it is becoming obvious that the field of what we call inner science, dealing with inner things, is of supreme importance. Here is my advice as we begin the century. Gerard K. O'Neill states, first, guard the freedom of ideas at all costs. Be alert that dictators have always played on the natural human tendency to blame others and to oversimplify. And don't regard yourself as a guardian of freedom unless you respect and preserve the rights of people you disagree with to free, public, unhampered expression. And I close with this quote from UNESCO Charter. Just as wars begin in the minds of men and women, peace also begins in our minds. The same species who invented war is capable of inventing peace. May I encourage you to remind me and to remind yourself and to remind our friends as much as humanly possible. Have the best days of our lives, day after day. Aspire to your greatness. Play in the theater of your self-expression in your own mystical symmetry. Decode the misinformation of disease and illness and death. And take the fear out of the process of rebirthing. Create the experience of your epic dream. Adventure into the cosmos fearlessly as possible. And may we reunite as members in this samsaric sangha and co-relate and dance in a symphony of freedom and keep the luminosity of that Dhamma light bright in this great universe, the light of enlightenment, the light of the highest aspirations of freedom, and within that process to make today the very best day of your life. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in, and God willing, see you tomorrow. Thank you.